At 11:40 p.m. on April 14, 1912, the largest ship ever built struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic. It took 2 hours and 40 minutes to sink. Everyone knows the ship sank. Everyone knows the iceberg. Everyone knows the band played on. But most people have never heard what happened below deck. In the boiler rooms, in the third-class cabins, in the flooding corridors where hundreds of people never even made it to the top. This is the story of the Titanic that history forgot. The RMS Titanic was not just a ship. It was a statement. Built in Belfast, Ireland, over 3 years by 3,000 workers, it was the largest moving object ever constructed by human hands. 269 meters long, 53 meters tall, weighing 46,000 tons. It had a swimming pool, a squash court, a Turkish bath, 4 elevators, a fully equipped hospital. Its first-class dining room was modeled on the Palace of Versailles. First-class passengers paid the equivalent of $100,000 in today's money for a one-way ticket. They had private promenades, a la carte restaurants, and servants who traveled with them. Below them, in second class, were doctors, teachers, and clergy. Comfortable but modest. And below them in third class or steerage were 709 immigrants. Irish, Swedish, Italian, Lebanese. People who had saved for years for a ticket. Families carrying everything they owned in a single bag. Heading to America for a new life. They were separated from first class by locked gates. Those gates would become their coffins. The Titanic carried 908 crew members. Stokers, engineers, waiters, stewards, officers. The men in the boiler rooms, called stokers or firemen, worked in conditions that first-class passengers never imagined existed on their luxury ship. 6 boilers, 29 furnaces, temperatures exceeding 50 degrees Celsius. They shoveled coal continuously, around the clock, in 4-hour shifts. When the iceberg struck, these men were the first to know something was wrong. Not from an announcement, from the sound, from the feeling of the ship shuddering beneath their feet, from the water that began appearing where water should never be. The chief engineer, Joseph Bell, immediately ordered his men to keep the pumps running and the power on. As long as the lights stayed on, the passengers above could see. As long as the pumps ran, they had time. Bell and all of his engineers went down with the ship. Not one survived. They stayed at their posts until the end, keeping the power on so others could escape. Their names are rarely mentioned. Their sacrifice is rarely remembered. At 11:39 p.m., lookout Frederick Fleet spotted something in the darkness ahead. He had no binoculars. The binoculars for the crow's nest had been locked in a cabinet in Southampton, and the officer who had the key had been transferred off the ship at the last minute. No one had thought to find a replacement key. Fleet rang the bell 3 times, the signal for an object ahead, and telephoned the bridge. Iceberg, right ahead. First Officer Murdoch gave the order, hard to starboard, engines full reverse. The ship began to turn. It was not enough. The iceberg scraped along the starboard side for 10 seconds. Below the waterline, a series of small punctures opened along 6 compartments. The Titanic had been designed to stay afloat with 4 compartments flooded. 6 were beyond its limits. Thomas Andrews, the ship's designer who was on board, inspected the damage and reported to the captain within an hour of the collision. His assessment was precise and devastating. The ship would sink in approximately 2 hours. Andrews spent the rest of the night helping passengers into lifeboats. He was last seen standing alone in the first-class smoking room, staring at a painting on the wall. He did not get into a lifeboat. The Titanic carried 20 lifeboats, enough for 1,178 people. There were 2,224 people on board. This was not an oversight. Maritime law at the time required lifeboats for only a fraction of passengers, the assumption being that ships this size were effectively unsinkable, and lifeboats were needed only to ferry survivors to nearby rescue ships. The first lifeboat was lowered at 12:45 a.m., over an hour after the collision. It had a capacity of 65. It left with 28 people. The reasons varied. Some passengers refused to board. The ship seemed safer than a small boat in the freezing North Atlantic. Some crew members were untrained in lifeboat procedures and were not sure how many people each boat could safely hold. Some boats on the port side were told to take women and children only and launched half empty because there were not enough women and children nearby. And in third class, the locked gates had not been opened. Stewards had been told to keep passengers in their areas. Some third-class passengers found their own way up. Many did not. Of the 709 third-class passengers, only 174 survived. Of the 324 first-class passengers, 201 survived. The difference was not luck. It was location on the ship and locked gates. At 2:17 a.m., 2 hours and 37 minutes after the collision, the forward funnel collapsed. The lights flickered and went out. The engineers below had finally lost their battle. The ship's stern rose out of the water as the bow pulled it down. Passengers and crew who had not made it into lifeboats slid and fell toward the bow. The hull groaned and shrieked under stresses it was never designed to withstand. At approximately 2:18 a.m., the ship broke in two. The bow section plunged immediately, taking hundreds of people with it. The stern section remained afloat for perhaps a minute longer. Then it too went under. The temperature of the water was -2 degrees Celsius. Survival time in water that cold, without a life jacket keeping you afloat, was approximately 15 minutes. There were over 1,500 people in the water. The lifeboats, floating nearby, most of them with empty seats, did not return immediately. Passengers in the boats feared being swamped by desperate swimmers. They listened to the screaming from the water. After 45 minutes, one lifeboat returned. It rescued 13 people. By the time the RMS Carpathia arrived at 4:10 a.m., there was no one left alive in the water. 1,517 people died. It remains the deadliest peacetime maritime disaster in history. The wreck of the Titanic lies 3,800 meters below the surface of the North Atlantic. It was discovered in 1985 by explorer Robert Ballard. The bow and stern sections are separated by 600 meters. Between them, a debris field 2 miles long. Shoes, suitcases, children's toys. Dishes from the first-class dining room. Bottles of wine still sealed. The shoes are perhaps the most haunting detail. They lie in pairs because leather preserves better than human tissue in the deep ocean. Where there are shoes, there was once a person. The Titanic carries approximately 1,500 pairs of shoes on the ocean floor. In 1912, a lifeboat that could have saved dozens returned for 13. Some doors, once closed, cannot be reopened. Subscribe to Echoes of Collapse. Every week, another moment when the world changed forever.